but
It
do I
is
think you could,
fantastic.
do I think you could get to the same deep sublime from Shakespeare? Sure, I just can't do it for you there.
It's so
I love
interesting.
Shakespeare, by the way, but I couldn't teach Shakespeare.
Well, you're teaching fabulously. Thank you.
All right, we are at 10 o'clock now, so sorry I couldn't get the other responses. But again, if you haven't sent in something to talk about the class or if things you want changed or thought about, just let Harold or me or both of us know. We're collecting all of your thoughts.
Good morning, everybody. For a brief play-in, Adria, who's not with us today, suggested that we listen to Mendelssohn's setting of Psalm 43. I will play approximately the first 2 minutes so that we can then get to work, and then afterwards for playout, we'll go back and listen to everything. And since it's really only a recording, I'm going to put up the text in Luther's translation to the German, which is the standard King. If there was a German King James version, this is it, and the Safaria version. So give me just 1 second to cue this all up. Okay, hold on. Let me go back to the beginning. Let me uh, share screen with the correct optimize for the clip for this, and sit back and enjoy Mendelssohn's setting of Psalm 43. All right, make sure I'm not playing. We had time for all of it. Mendelssohn, born of a Jewish background, not identifying as Jewish, an early Romantic composer in Germany. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Rabbi.
Good morning, everybody. So today we're going to jump into the study of Psalm 18, which all of you read the Fisher version. And again, Fisher, I don't want to use the word translation. It's a version, it's an interpretation. I'll repeat over and over again. All translations are interpretations. But I wanted you to read Fisher so you could read in English, you could get quickly enough to be able to do in one session. Hopefully, you got an overview. So the first thing we look at in these 18 verses, and we're going to look at the Levi today. We're not going to do Sepharia because the Levi is a little bit more accessible. But before we even get to that is to talk a little bit about the ark. Remember, we've discussed all the different kinds of psalms there are. There are psalms of lament. There are psalms of exaltation. There are psalms of praise. There are psalms of thanksgiving. There are historical psalms. There are thanksgiving psalms. So first of all, where would you put this psalm, just having read Fisher? It's quite different in some ways, although it has many elements that I think you might recognize at this point. But first of all, it's a lot longer for sure. But anything else? What would you say if you could kind of sum up the psalm? Could you do that and say what kind of psalm you might think it to be, Sarah?
Honestly, I think it's a psalm of thanksgiving, as the psalmist recounts the things that he has and that the power greater than he has done it.
Exactly. It's often seen as a psalm of thanksgiving, but it's very different than the other psalms that we might have said earlier that we've experienced psalms of thanksgiving, because they seem to be the things he's giving thanks for seem somewhat hard, might be harder for a regular human being to relate to, kind of on a big scale, but we're going to get to that. Dean?
I think it's like the Iliad. It feels like a battle.
Yes.
It really feels like David wrote it,
Yep.
and it feels like it's like a commander looking over the long war and giving thanks. It's very profound.
Excellent. It is. There's a lot written about the similarities to ancient literature where the hero looks back on military victories, and it definitely feels like some kind of summary of a lot of different escapades, right? Like you can, Lori?
Well, the first thing that many things struck me, but it felt very much like ancient Near East work. It felt like a very old work.
Yeah.
I could see people coming up to the altar with their sacrifices. And the other thing that struck me was felt very apocalyptic, of the images like from, the chariots like Ezekiel and all these crazy images. So
very cinematic, right? In ways that some of the other psalms, you really can't. Some of the other psalms are so personal and very internal, or very about, you could kind of see scenes, really. Doesn't it feel like you could see some of the verses were very dramatic? Peter?
There's something very heroic about this,
Yep.
and I really wonder about the context in which it was
Yep.
presented, who was hearing this, because it's not sort of hidden. It's not a quick text. It has a kind of propaganda behind it as
Yes,
well.
it does feel that way, doesn't it? It feels a little bit like that. Yep.
So
Excellent.
I really would like to know when and how this was presented, who he was playing to, because it doesn't always sound as though he's playing to God.
Yep. It feels quite different that way, doesn't it? It does, and that's why it does feel like the reference to the Iliad or to Homer, the feeling of it being this big story that's for history, that we should look back and see. It has that great feeling. Terrific. Judy Hollander? Your hair's looking great. Your hair's
what?
looking great. Your hair's
It's
looking
growing,
great.
I measure it every night. Anyway, this is serious stuff here. This is the book of Samuel. This is a repetition. It seems like it's a repetition.
Judy, don't say anything yet. I'm gonna say that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Never mind. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Too smart, Judy. Harold.
In our Chavruta group, it felt like there were echoes of the revelation on Mount Sinai with
Mhm.
the thunder and lightning, and the Exodus story when the sea was split and they walked on dry land, which raised the question of how much does the psalmist know of the rest of the Bible, and or was there a common source that both
Right.
the rest of the Bible and the psalmist were drawing upon?
Right. Well, to get to Judy's point, I will jump right in. So this is almost identical, although there are many significant differences, which writers have examined, as you can imagine, in PhD dissertations, the differences. In Samuel, the second book of Samuel, chapter 22, and look how it looks. I'm going to hold this up so you can see. There are differences. It's not exactly the same, but can you see in my Tanakh that it's written like a poem in the book of
Right.
Samuel? Can everybody see that? That there's is that clear enough?
Can I try to get it from Safaria? Would that be
It
helpful?
won't. I don't think Safaria
Oh.
will show you how this looks. I want you to see how it actually looks in the Tanakh.
Yes, we
So
can.
I think Safaria will just show you the line after line. So there is and this is very similar. This is a very unusual thing. I mean, many Psalms refer to things that we see in other parts of the historic books. And when we say historic books, we mean Joshua, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles. Those are what we call the historic books of the Tanakh. Remember what the Tanakh is? Everybody remember the Tanakh? 3 parts, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. In the Nevi'im section of Tanakh, there are not, which means prophets, there are not just prophets, there are books we actually call historic books. I know, it's the names are so, if only the names were actually names that would, tell you what things were, but no, it has to be more confusing than that. Anyway, in the book of Samuel, in the second book of the book of Samuel, most of the text of this psalm is found. There are some differences. You'll notice differences if you look, but the point is it's very, very similar. And tradition absolutely has it that the tradition that talks about authors of the Psalms, and tradition says, I think 70 something of the Psalms were written by David. This is absolutely one that tradition says is written by David. Again, scholars who study these things are extremely skeptical of that. But in the tradition of the Psalms, it really feels like it's written in David's voice, right? In a way that the others, who knows? Here he is, he's telling his story. So these are some just big framework questions. We see it really feels so different. However, you'll see when we look at Bernstein's version of this, she finds a way to experience this as a personal, individual psalm. And that's part of the point, that even a psalm like this, which feels so epic in its storytelling, and it feels so militaristic, and it feels like it's not about mere mortals. Who among us, are David fighting all the battles he fought? How could we possibly relate to this? Bernstein will show us that even this psalm can be read with deeply personal, in a deeply personal way. So I don't want you to think it's not possible. So we're going to now study the psalm with the Hebrew as we've done. I'm going to move through at a fairly brisk pace because it is long. But I think it'll be fun. Now that you've seen a little Fisher, we're now going to go into the Hebrew. And we're using Levi in case if you have the book of Levi's book. Again, the 2-volume. We're going to be looking at Levi to begin with. Verse 1. We're not going to read it all the way through, but I'm going to ask one of our Hebrew readers, would you read the first 10 verses in Hebrew and then somebody else read the first 10 verses in English?
I can do this.
Yael, is that Yael?
Yep.
Great. So just the first 10 verses, please.
למנצח לעבד אדוני לדוד, אשר דיבר לאדוני את דברי השירה הזאת, ביום הציל אדוני אותו מקו כל אויביו ומיד שאול. ויאמר, ארחמך אדוני חזקי, אדוני סלעי ומצודתי ומפלתי, אלי צורי אחסה בו, מגיני וקרן ישעי משגבי. מהולל אקרא אדוני ומן אויבי יבשע. Harold, can you scroll up, please?
Harold, you're muted.
I can't, okay. Should I read from my book or
You
should
read
I
from
wait
your
for-
book, yeah, because if I scroll too far, it gets to the next, goes to the next page.
Okay, so
What line are you on?
5.
Right here.
עפפוני חבלי מוות ונחלי בליעל יבעטוני. Right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, okay. חבלי שאול סבבוני, קידמוני מוקשי מוות. בצר לי אקרא אדוני ואל אלוהי אשבע, ישמע מהיכלו קולי ושבעתי לפניו תבוא באוזניו. ותרעש הארץ ומוסדי הרים ירגזו ויתגעשו כי חרה לו. עלה עשן באפו ואש מפיו תאכל, גחלים בערו ממנו. ויט שמיים וירד, וערפל תחת רגליו.
Beautiful. Somebody want to read it in English? I think you'll have to have it in front of you.
Can you not see it on the screen?
Only down till verse 4.
Okay. Sorry.
I can read it. Michael Goldstein can read it.
Okay.
Go
To the
for it.
conductor, to the servant of Adonai, to David, who spoke to Adonai the words of this song on the day that God saved him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said, I have loved you from the womb, Adonai, my strength. Adonai is my towering crag, my fortress, my rescuer. My God is my rock. I take refuge in him. My shield, horn of my victory, my stronghold. Praised, I call out, is Adonai. Over my enemies, I will be made victorious. The cords of death are choking me. Destructive floods have swamped me. The cords of Sheol have encircled me. The traps of death have advanced upon me. In my narrow space, I cried out, Adonai. To my God, I make entreaty. May God hear my voice from the palace. May my entreaty enter God's ears. Do I continue?
Yeah, to 10.
The earth shivered and quivered. The bases of the mountains shake. They shivered because God is furious. Smoke has gone up in God's nostrils. From God's mouth, a consuming fire. Inside the holy presence, flames leapt from the coals. God stretched out the heavens and descended. The feet came closer. Beneath them, deep darkness.
Thank you. And I meant to mention also yesterday, today is Tuesday, right? That some of you I hope you got the notice, Motzei Shabbat, that Shari Klugman's father passed away. And Shari and Debbie have been members of this class from the beginning, and Shari and Debbie moved to Tel Aviv, and the funeral was yesterday. So, Tasha, maybe you could put Shari's email address in the chat in case anybody would like to write to her. But let's say that we are studying today in memory of her father, and I know that would be meaningful to both of them. They live in Tel Aviv now, and her father just passed away on Thursday night, Friday morning. All right, so Lamanet Seyach. Well, we've certainly come across Lamanet Seyach before as a opening. And you can see Levi loves seeing Lamanet Seyach not just as a leader or but as a musical leader. So he uses the definition as conductor. So he's making a decision there that he is obviously, I think he has been on solid ground. But it's whoops. Now this is interesting because the superscription, which is verse 1, is longer than any other description we've had before, right? we've had Shir LeDavid, Mizmor Shir LeDavid, Lamanatseach, Tfilah LeDavid. But here, look at this. This is to the conductor, to the servant of Adonai, to David, who spoke to Adonai in the words of this song on the day that God saved him from the hand of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. That's the superscription. That's the longest superscription, the wordiest that we've encountered. And look at all the different things we learn about David here. So Lamanatseach is to the conductor, but we see with the psik, with the line, and then with the colon, Levi is separating that. So there's two twos, in other words. One is instruction to the musical, to somebody who's going to be performing this psalm, in other words. And the other is to the servant of Adonai, le'eved. Eved is a servant. It's from the same word as avodah, for work. Eved could be a slave also, could be a servant, a slave, a worker. Eved Adonai is a very common phrase for servant of God, somebody whose life is about service to Yud Hey Vav Hey. LeDavid, to David. So it's the servant of God to David. And itself is biblical parallelism right there. Next level is Asher Diber. Asher, who or which it can be, who Diber, from the word Lidaber. And this is in the PL form, which we'll talk about that right now, but Diber, who spoke. Yud Hey, to God. Divrim Shoresh is. So the word Dvar is a very interesting word. Daled Bet Resh. Can mean to speak, but it could also mean. So dvarim can mean things, or it can mean words or speak. So aseret hadibrot, commandments or words, really. Aseret hadibrot really doesn't mean commandments. It's a very funny translation, actually. Words or sayings. So here we have the repetition of who spoke to Yud Hey Vav Hey, Divrei, at the words of Hashira Hazot, this song. Shira is like the word shir, which we have seen as Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat. Shira can be a song or a poem, and it can be shir or shira. We're not going to talk about grammar right now, but it could be either in the masculine or the feminine. Here it is, who spoke Hashira Hazot, this song or this prayer or this poem. He's choosing to call it a song because of the musical nature of Tehillim. And always Levi loves to emphasize anything that brings out that these were not just poems, that these were set to music. And the way they were experienced was primarily through the music. So, who spoke these words of this song? Be Yom. Be is that prefix for in. Be Yom, in the day Hitzil. Hatzalah means to be saved. Anybody in Brooklyn, you see the ambulances are called Hatzalah. It's
Yeah,
with the,
they're all over the place.
they're all over, not just Brooklyn, huh? I haven't seen any Hatzalahs in Inwood, but yeah.
Washington Heights has them.
They are? Okay, so they don't come up to me.
They're coming up. They're coming up.
They're coming. So Hatzalah is the Yiddishized pronunciation of the noun, which means to save. So Hatzalah is the ambulance corps of the private ambulance corps of the Orthodox in New York City. But here it's Hitzil, who is in the day God saved Oto, him. Mikaf is a palm or the hand, from the hand Mikol Oivav. Again, remember there are different words for enemies or bad people. Oivav, his enemies, and from the hand of Shaul. Who was Shaul? Who was Shaul to David, if we remember the story of David? Shaul was best friends with Jonathan, Jonathan and David, and Jonathan.
Rabbi, you're cutting out and you just froze.
Jonathan's father was Shaul, very, very, very jealous that David was out for his kingdom, and became intensely jealous and set out to kill David. So that's just the historical reference here. So God saved him from whom? from all of his enemies, and this is again biblical parallelism. In one phrase, it's all of his enemies, but then it's an intensification. It wasn't just all of his enemies, and David did have other enemies in his life, many of whom he created, but but Shaul is the king who was spent the last part of his life. Shaul spent his life trying to kill David. So this is the sense of a real pursuer, not just a passive enemy, but something or somebody that is pursuing somebody to complete destruction. Now, that is a historical reference, but as I said, every psalm can be read internally.
Rabbi,
So Shaul,
I think your connection is a little wonky this morning. You've been freezing and cutting out from time to time. I don't know if there's anything to do, but and you're frozen now.
Still here, Harold.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just waiting for the rabbi to come back.
You'll just have to start teaching the rest of the psalm, Harold.
Any questions so far? Any words that we can help you with?
I have a question.
Yes, Linda.
This Saul, is this the same Saul, or is it a different Saul who is then becomes Paul to the Christian community?
No. This is
Different
King Saul.
King Saul. This is a different one.
This is King Saul in the David story, not Saul who becomes Paul. But that's a great question.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Different Saul.
This Saul was not struck by God on the path to Damascus. Any other? Ben Schaff,
Okay.
I see your hand up.
You have the chapter in Samuel 2?
Yes, I do. 22, Samuel 22. Why would you like me to? Why don't I do that? Why I have that? Why don't I put that up on screen while we're waiting for the return of the rabbi? How would that be? So you can see.
That's great.
It's virtually the same.
View. Okay. Hold on. Oh my goodness. Why did I just lose this? All right. So let me show that. So do you see how it's laid out in the poetic way? I can pull this up on Safari if you'd like to take a look at it while we're waiting for the rabbi. It's 2:22. Yes? Do I hear a yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking. It's very similar.
All right. So hold on. Let me share the screen with this. This is Samuel. I'm waiting. The rabbi hasn't even texted me. I don't know. She's been taken away by aliens. So who would like to just, Linda, can you read the first verse here in the English?
Sure. David addressed the words of this song to the Lord after the Lord had saved him from the hands of all his enemies and from the hands of Saul. He said, O Lord, my crag, my fastest, my deliverer. O God, the rock wherein I take shelter, my shield, my mighty champion, my fortress, my refuge, my savior, you who rescue me from violence. All praise I called on the Lord, and I was delivered from my enemies. For the breakers of death encompassed me. The torrents of Belial terrified me. The snares of Sheol encircled me. The coils of death engulfed me. In my anguish, I called on the Lord, cried out to my God. In his abode, he heard my voice. My cry entered his ears. Then the earth rocked and quaked. The foundations of heaven shook, rocked by his indignation. Smoke went up his nostrils. From his mouth came devouring fire. Live coals blazed forth from him. He bent the sky and came down. thick cloud beneath his feet.
Thank you. So that was the first 10 verses.
Right.
So if we back up just a little, we're at the story of David and Goliath. Once again, there was fighting at Gath. There was a giant of a man who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He too was descended from the Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. These 4 were descended, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to close this. Since you were the one who brought this up, Judy, did you have anything else you wanted to say about this?
No.
Okay.
Other than, I just find David, we were talking about these being as epic poems, and who would be a better hero for our epic poem of Jewish history but David. So I thought that was really very fitting, but that was just a thought.
Okay. So there was a question in chat here. Can anyone tell us the chronology? Was Samuel text first or Psalms? There is no colophon, there's no date. The histories are considered to be slightly late. The Torah is the first part. The histories would be slightly later. The Psalms probably towards the end of the books of the Bible. So it is likely that the Psalms would have been written after Samuel would have been written. So it is possible. So that's interesting. Did the psalmist reset what was in Psalms, or did Samuel reset what, did the psalmist take it from Samuel, or did Samuel take it from the Psalms? That is a good question for the rabbi. Peter Klein, I see your hand up.
I was starting to write in the chat. The fact that we have these 2 parallel documents seems to suggest sort of a professional PR job, in the sense similar to Shakespeare rewriting history, like the double Henriads that come out as a kind of Plantagenet propaganda, adjusting things so it turns out to benefit his sovereign at the time. This, given all the things that David is later capable of doing, it seems like this is planted in Samuel after the fact, so that he seems both faithful and redeemed and anointed in a way that is really kind of extreme. It seems a little bit professional to me to have both of these there, that there is some historic machine at work here.
Well, it's always possible that they went back and edited and they took something from Psalms that seemed like it would work and put it in. Sarah Sloan, you have your hand up.
I've done a fair amount of studying of this, and it's my impression, my understanding, that individual Psalms were written long before the book of Psalms was compiled, so that it's very possible that this Psalm predates Samuel, or it may not, but the fact that Psalms were generally written later, were generally compiled later, is sort of irrelevant to the conversation.
Okay, so, and even there are some things, I know that somebody has set off as poetry in the Torah, that there are things there that seem to be much older that were then from the tradition that were put into it. So Sarah, are you saying that this text in general was a much older text? And maybe, there's always the question, who wrote the Psalms, or there's a great similarity between some of the Psalms and other Middle Eastern literature.
This is much older than a lot of the other Psalms. I don't know dates, but I do know this. I remember learning this way back in high school. And
all right. So the rabbi's internet is not working. So we can do a few things. Yael offered to answer some questions about the Hebrew if we had them, which might be nice to do for the 5 minutes before we play out. Ben Shafran has his hand up, and then Dean has her hand up. Ben, why don't we go to you?
This is far from dispositive, but I've read a lot about some of the chronology in the Bible, and there is a fairly good background to assume that the books from Deuteronomy through almost the end of Kings were written by Jeremiah, who was exiled to Babylon. So anything that King David would have written, including some of his Psalms, would have predated the book of Samuel. It's possible that this was actually taken out of the Psalm.
Okay, thank you. So, right. So again, we see one book, one volume, which is probably a compilation of literature, as Sarah was saying, that was written over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there may be, if the historical David would have been what, 1100 BC or something like that. And this book of Psalms is completed in maybe the 400s or 500s, that if some of them actually date back to the time of David, they would have dated to before the period described in these later books. Is that what you're saying, Ben?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the last couple of minutes, did anyone, I will put the Hebrew back up, and if anyone had any questions that we felt that Yael could help us with on this, I need to reopen it again, on the Hebrew, that you're remembering, let me just get it back here. Who has a question? Hold on. Psalms. Oh, raise your hand if you had a question about the Hebrew, then. Hold on. All right, here is the levy. And let's see, Lori Croatman has a question.
The answer is probably no, but is there any connection between Sheol and Sheol?
Laurie, that's a really great question. I had the same thought as I was reading this. I never thought about that before. It's the same letters. It's pronounced a little differently. I don't know, but it does kind of sound the same.
I don't remember the exact story. I can research that, but I believe there's something that says that Shaul came from Sha'alti, from request or borrowing. But I have to look at it and see if I can pinpoint it exactly.
Yeah, it does come from the same root, to ask, she'ela, a question, sha'al, to borrow. So all of these are related. I don't know if it's related to Sheol.
Yeah, El, you know what, while we're doing this, this is a very interesting thing, what some of the names in the Bible actually mean. What is, the person we call Adam, what does that mean?
Adam is part of the word for Adama, which means earth. So Adam came from the earth.
Wow.
Yitzchak?
Yitzchak means will laugh. If you remember the story, Sarah was 99 years old and did not have children. And then God told Sarah she would have a child, and she laughed because she thought that was ridiculous. It could not happen. And her son was born Yitzchak, will laugh. The name Yaakov, Jacob, means will follow. Jacob was the second twin after Esau. So, and he held Esau's akev, which is heel. So he followed Esau and he held his heel. And both these words are related to the name Yaakov.
How about Yosef?
Yosef means will add, to add something. Joseph was not the youngest. Benjamin was the youngest, but Joseph was the first son of the second wife, right? Rachel, who was the beloved wife of Jacob. So maybe it was added, added value because he came from the beloved wife, not the first wife who was less beloved.
And having mentioned Benjamin, any meaning to that name?
Binyamin. Yamin is right. Remember, we've seen a lot of right and left, or no left, but right, standing to my right. So the word Yamin is in Binyamin, the son of Yamin, Benjamin, perhaps?
Actually,
Benjamin Sheffer, do you know this?
What? Actually, it's interesting that there is no meaning attached to that in the text. Rachel died when he was born, but she named him the son of my sorrow, Ben Oni. And then the text goes on to say, and his father called him Binyamin. And that's it. It doesn't give any reason.
Some of the other biblical names, Avimelech.
Well, the word Av means father of, so Avi Melech. Melech means king. So Avi Melech means the father of the king.
And let's talk about some of our major angels. Michael, Michael.
Michael. So El is God, as we know. Most names that end with El have the word God in them. Interestingly, not the word Yael, because that is written with an Ayin and not with an Aleph. So Yael does not have a God in it, which I prefer this way. But Michael, what does Micha means?
How about Raphael?
Who is like my God?
Like God.
Who is like
that's
my
right.
God?
Micha Mocha, right? Michael, who is like God. Very interesting.
How about Gavriel?
Gabriel. So
the strength of God.
Man of God.
Resh, Gever, which means man, or Gibor, which is a hero. Right, Ben? What were you saying?
Yeah, the strength of God, the
Strength
hero
of God, the hero of God.
So we have Michael, Gabriel, Raphael.
Rafa means to heal, right? We have refuah shlema, refuah, Rafa means medicine in Hebrew. The word rofe in Hebrew is a doctor, a physician. So Raphael, God heals.
Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, and...
How about any of the women?
Yes, how about women? Chava. Does Chava?
Chava, well, Chava. I don't know.
Chava is life. Like it's the female of Chaim.
From
Chava, life.
all right, so if you replace the vav with a u, that comes from chaya or chaim. I can see that. You know, the vav and the yud are the weak letters, right? The weak letters of God.
Yeah, right.
And Sue says, how about our matriarchs? Sarah,
Rachel,
Rebecca, Rachel, Leah.
So Leah means tired. To be, yeah. So, you know, Leah was the first wife and she wasn't so good looking. She was kind of replaced unknowingly by her younger sister, or her younger sister was the favored wife who came next, was replaced by Leah, by the father who wanted her married. And they say she wasn't very good looking and maybe she had tired eyes. So Leah means tired.
All right, so we're going to go to play out, but I'm going to go to the Ruth story for a second. Naomi, who changes her name, Mara, Naomi. What does that play on?
Mara means bitterness.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
It's
Yeah.
like from the word maror that we have in Pesach. Mara, maror, the bitterness.
Yeah.
All right. So
Can I just say one word? There is this woman, Yael Karanak, I don't know.
Yes.
Right, and she has been translating the Torah, changing the genders. The males are females and the females are males. And when she changes the words, the names from female to male, they suddenly, to me, became more understandable. We say Yitzchak and we don't think of the meaning of it, but when she say Titzchak, and it really changes the meaning and it makes it a lot clearer what the meaning is of the names. So she's really interesting.
So I posted this Yael Konarek in chat, and I will do it. It's a fascinating, it's called the Torah Ta Project, and we went to see it. I'm going to play out with some music. You can stay or not. The rabbi is safe. She's just not on the internet. And we will see you all tomorrow where we'll pick up with Levi. Thank you so much for your flexibility and your generosity. Very, very much appreciated. All right, so we're going to play out. Stay as long as you'd like.
Thank you, Harold.
All right, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Harold.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Good
so
job.
much.
Thank you.
And just so you know, Annika and Sherry and I are working very hard behind the scenes. Thank you all so much for the wonderful recordings that you've already submitted. We look forward to it is going to be an amazing, it's going to be an amazing evening on the 16th. And I'm sending out right now another link to the sign up page and the graphic like Linda asked for. So if you're writing your own email to people, you can use the graphic that we are using to promote it. Shep, you need to be up right side for the class.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I'm in
Otherwise,
outer space. There's no gravity.
I will admit that I was the one who turned off your video yesterday. It was so distracting to see you floating up there. That anyway, okay. On that note, bye everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Harold.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Six. Okay.
Hi, Scott. Goodbye, Scott.
Hi.